All righty. Well, welcome everybody. We are so excited to provide for you our latest LinkedIn Live webinar. We have a really interesting topic and speaker this time. Craig Coyle, who is actually the founder of a new organization called Operation Lead. And what he's doing is bringing his career experience as a West Point graduate and as Apache pilot, and really all the lessons he's learned from that to you guys to share about really new leaders. It's interesting. He shared a fact that half of new leaders experience burnout within the first year. And we couldn't agree with that more at Sales Xceleration. And a lot of it just stems from one day you're like a high performing salesperson, the next day you're in charge and you have no new skills. It just is a different day. So Craig's going to break it down for you and talk about things you need to do to really equip someone to be a great leader, and then your responsibility as a leader to deliver on that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Craig, and thanks for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Maura, for that great introduction. And yeah, happy to be here. So I want to start with this. I'm going to pose a question to everybody, and feel free to drop some comments in the chat based on your thoughts. But here's the opener. What would you do if you found out today that your organization or your team was 90% toxic? In 2021, I was a captain active duty in the U.S. Army, early 2021, and I received orders that I would be deploying to Iraq in support of Operation Inherent Resolve, which is the mission overseas in the Middle East right now within Iraq and Syria, where we're continuing, us and our coalition partners are continuing to, attack the fight against ISIS. And as I was going over there, I had performed really well in some previous leadership roles and previous support roles. And my brigade commander had selected me to go deploy with one of his organizations to take a line Apache company directly responsible for operations in that area. And so as I got over there, I found out a little bit more about the organization and what the mission set was. We would have responsibility for 24/7 attack operation support all across the entire country of Iraq. We were the only Apache company in Iraq, and we would also be responsible for some operations with our sister company in Syria as well. Now, how did we do this? I had an organization where I was about to take charge of an organization of about 50 personnel, comprised of two totally different categories that supported each other. One side of the organization was all of our maintenance personnel, and they were responsible for the readiness of our aircraft and making sure they're ready to fly each and every day. And the other half of our organization was all the pilots, the ones that would be going out executing these missions. At the time, there was a significant drawdown in personnel and service members from the United States forces that were allowed in the region. So we essentially were at a minimal manning roster to execute this mission. We really didn't have any wiggle room or margin in terms of capacity. So there was a lot on our plate. And as I was getting ready to take over this organization, I remember sitting in the company tent a night or two before the change of command ceremony, where I would officially get handed that guide on. And I watched one of the junior pilots in the company literally scream at the person that he directly reported to. And as I saw that take place, I saw the previous company commander that was in charge of both of those individuals scream at both of those individuals in front of everybody else in the organization. This event really just confirmed everything that everybody else in the task force had really already known. As I kind of started getting familiar with all of the people, there was about 400 people in the task force. Nobody wanted to work with anybody that was associated with Alpha Company, or more affectionately known to me as the Red Wolves. If some of our pilots entered into the talk to get a mission brief, almost everybody would leave. Nobody wanted to go into our tent. Even our maintainers didn't want to work with our pilots. Some of our pilots didn't even want to work with each other. And this all kind of culminated one night just before I took command, when my battalion commander at the time handed me a piece of paper, and it was our company's command climate survey report. Now, I'm sure everybody here on the call is familiar with something similar to this, but essentially all it is, it's a survey, an anonymous survey that gets sent out to everybody in the organization to assess the health and environment and the climate of that organization. Well, the results were pretty telling, because exactly how I opened up this talk is what we found out about Alpha Company at the time. My battalion commander said this was the worst, by far, feedback he's ever seen a company get on one of these surveys in his 20-year career. So I wasn't quite sure what I had been signed up for, but now it was my opportunity to try to tackle that amidst all the other requirements that we had to meet as a no-fail mission in the region. To backtrack a little bit, I thought I had everything figured out when I was entering into leadership. I had been super successful my whole life. I was a valedictorian of my high school class, as you could see by the nerd wearing glasses on the screen there. I was fortunate that gave me the opportunity to attend the United States Military Academy, where I fell in love with aviation and wanted to pursue that for the rest of my career and the rest of my life, really. I remember being a kid always staring up at the sky whenever a plane came by, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I pursued aerospace engineering, loved it, and was fortunate that I found something that I was so passionate to spend so much time doing, because I just applied the principles and the mindset that had made me successfully previous in life to help me be successful at West Point. I graduated as an honor graduate and was fortunate to qualify to get to attend flight school once I commissioned into the United States Army, where I did the same thing, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. Rinse and repeat. Tackle life the same way that I've always been tackling life, and that's enabled me to be successful. And I was fortunate again, right? I qualified to attend the Apache course and was able to graduate the Apache course and eventually earn my wings, which you could see there on the screen, me pictured with my dad. At this point in my career, I had just received orders that my next assignment would be in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and that's where I would assume my first leadership position. And I was about to be humbled. Everything that I had done previously to be successful is exactly how I went into leadership, and it didn't work. Now, arguably, I probably had one of the best opportunities and development life cycles a young individual can have before he enters into leadership. And even myself, I really struggled. My question for everybody today is, what about new leaders and managers, from first line supervisors to our mid-level managers across our organizations? What about them? Were they ever intending to be in leadership positions? Are they prepared for it? Or are they planning to do the same thing that I did and try to force that square peg into a round hole to try and tackle their leadership? Unfortunately, if we look at what a lot of the research tells us, we're not doing a very good job in terms of the impact we're having across our society as leaders. As you can see on the screen, and I'll let you all kind of read through some of the statistics there, but the message is pretty clear. The impact that leaders across our society have on our workforce tends not to be the best one. So many people say that they're stressed out because of their management. So many people are leaving their jobs directly because of their management. So many people are just not engaged at work directly because of their management. But this isn't just stopping at the impact it has on the people we're leading. It impacts us as the leaders as well. You know, Maura opened up with an incredible statistic about new leaders, but it's not just that. It's not just new leaders experiencing burnout. More than half of new leaders, managers, however you want to call it, supervisors within the first 12 to 18 months either fail, either seek a new job, or experience overwhelm, burnout, whatever you want to call it. We have to do better than that. Think about the impact that this is having, second, third, fourth order effects in our organizations. Leadership is the root of everything that happens in our workforce, in whatever organization we're a part of. If our leadership isn't working, then chances are there are going to be some significant challenges we're going to face in our businesses. But it doesn't just stop there. If our leadership isn't working, what's the impact that that's having on our personal lives? How is that affecting our mental health? How is that affecting our physical health? How is that affecting our emotional health? And then how does that in turn continue to affect how we're performing in the workforce? It's a vicious cycle, and if we're not on the positive end of it, it can get worse, it can get worse, and it can get worse. And that's why so many organizations today are facing talent retention issues, talent attraction issues, culture issues, and we typically tend to try and address those issues with some band-aid fixes, but we have to address the root. If we want good fruit, we have to address the root. So we have a challenge in our society today. How do we positively impact this next generation of leaders, these leaders throughout all of our workforce, all of our society that maybe never aspired to be the top of the organization, but have a clear impact on how our organization performs and the lives of those within our businesses and our teams? I think the first thing that we have to do when something just isn't going the way we want to is we have to clearly identify what the problem is that we're facing. Without clearly identifying the problem, we can't clearly identify a solution that can address that problem. Before we do that, I kind of want to talk about what the problem isn't. Today, content, information, knowledge is absolutely everywhere we could possibly think it would be. We are being attacked by some form of content, information, knowledge at all points of the day. You have to be super, super intentional to isolate yourself from that content, information, or knowledge sometimes. 20, 30 years ago, when I was growing up, I feel like information tended to be a little bit more tribal. And what I mean by that is, sometimes information had to be handed down a certain way in order for it to reach you, and then in order for you to be able to leverage it. But today, that's not the case. Information is absolutely everywhere. It's right at our fingertips. A great example of this that I like to think about is growing up when I had to figure out how to learn how to tie a tie. Now, some of you may not experience this challenge, but for those of us that had situations where that was a necessity, back in the day, you had to find someone that knew how to do it, and that was your only option. But what about today? If you have to figure out how to tie a necktie today, where do you go? I think all of us, and you could throw it in the comments what you might do, but I know I would go straight to YouTube and I'd have it figured out within about 5 minutes. So it's not the access or the availability to knowledge that's our challenge. Think about leadership today in general. There are hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of books, podcasts available right at our fingertips for us to access and pour this knowledge into our lives. Beyond that, even just think about this platform we're on right now. LinkedIn, almost everybody is talking about leadership. I was researching some statistics on the thought leadership space earlier today, and LinkedIn says that of all the stalwart trending topics that continue to be discussed on the platform, leadership and management continues to be the one that has stayed the course since LinkedIn's inception. One, it's not going away, and two, everybody is talking about it. So the challenge isn't the fact that the information doesn't exist. So what is the challenge? And I think there's three parts to it. The first two kind of go hand in hand. In order for us to be able to leverage knowledge that exists, one, we have to know the information exists. And then two, we need to believe that that information is for us and important to us. Said maybe another way, we have to care to pursue that information. Part of my story is that when I entered into my first leadership position, I just didn't really realize that there was information out there that I could be absorbing to make me a better leader and to help me learn how to approach this new position and this new role differently. It's just like tying a tie. You don't really care whether or not the information exists until you have a problem and you need to address it. But immediately you know that you have a problem and that knowledge becomes important to you, and you have to pursue that knowledge in order to be able to leverage it for your own good. And that leads to the final point here, is if we know the information exists and we believe that the knowledge is important to us, the last thing that is absolutely crucial is we have to be able to easily digest that knowledge. There's a really famous writer and business leader by the name of Don Miller. I love following his stuff. He speaks mostly on marketing, but a lot of small business topics as well. And one of the things that he says that's really profound is that people will not move into a fog alone. Now, he typically applies that message to marketing or even sales, which really speaks to this audience. But I want you to think about it just in terms of how the brain works and what that means. See, our brains, we're wired to conserve energy because that's how we survive. If we're constantly expending energy, then we may not have the energy reserved in a flight or flight scenario. So when we're in a situation where we don't have a clear path to take, our subconscious automatically starts telling us the easier path and the safest path for our survival is to stay put. That's why when sometimes there's not a clear path or we're being over exerted with knowledge, we kind of feel paralyzed sometimes. And that is often the truth with our new leaders and new managers in the workforce today. They may know that some information exists and they may believe that the knowledge is important to them based off some of the challenges that they may be facing in their roles. But where do they start? Who should they listen to? What's most important for them to consume in terms of leadership or management knowledge right now so they can take one step forward? I think the solution really comes from things that are right within our grasp. When I look back and reflect on my career in the military, I had a kind of unique path because really I took two paths, two parallel or simultaneous careers that kind of worked together. See, on one hand, on the left side of the screen, I was a leader in the military. That's what West Point exists for, to commission leaders into the United States Army as officers that would continue to promote through leadership and command positions and ultimately lead our Army to success in whatever the nation calls it to do. Well, then on the other hand, I was a pilot, so professional aviator in the United States Army. And within that, there was a clear path that I had to take in order to grow as a professional aviator. There was a unique contrast between the two that I realized as I was really kind of thinking through some of the challenges that we face today. See, as an aviator, the stakes are super high. So the Army had no choice but to make sure that I was trained and developed to succeed. There's just too much on the line. I mean, think about it. In aviation, as a pilot, you only have one opportunity to make a mistake. You may not have the opportunity again. And it may not only be your life that's at stake, but it could be several other lives as well. And so in an industry like the aviation world, It is absolutely critical that we develop pilots that not only know what they're doing, but continue to grow and grow and grow and develop. Now, when I contrast that with my experience in the military, I kind of just felt like I was thrown out there onto an island and told, hey, figure it out as you go. You got this. And when that happened, it was not a fun experience. But what if we had something similar in place, like the aviation industry has to train its pilots, to help ensure that the leaders within our organizations get the right tools, the right training, the right nurturement and development to be able to have the positive impact that we know we need them to have in our organizations. The first step to that is we have to learn and make the decision to treat leadership like a profession. Now, what do I mean by that? I think the key thing here is to understand what it really means for something to be a profession. I think there's two things that are required in order for something to be a profession. One, there has to be some stakes. If something, some industry, some application, some type of skill is to be a professional skill, the only reason it would be required to be viewed that way is because if something went wrong, something really bad could happen. I think about engineering and buildings and airplanes. I think about medical operations and the potential consequences to not being treated like a profession in those industries. The second thing that is important to know about a profession is because of the stakes, we inherently and subconsciously realize that there is a lot of knowledge and information required to learn so that we can mitigate the risks associated with that skill set. So when we make a decision in our minds as the senior leaders of our organizations to treat leadership like a profession, we unlock the opportunity to create a culture in our organizations that, one, understand that leadership has a significant impact and there are stakes involved. And then two, create a culture of people pursuing the knowledge that will enable them to become professional leaders. This is really how we address, in large part, the first two components of our challenge. It's how we help people subconsciously realize that there is knowledge that exists that will make them a better leader, and that it's incredibly important for them to pursue it, to care about it, and to seek it out. Now, part of this too is, what do we define as a position of leadership? And creating a true culture of professional leadership means, regardless of where you are in the organization, from first line supervisor all the way to the tippy top, is that each of those roles requires to be handled professionally. When we do that, we start creating momentum in the right direction to create a shift in our organizations to solve this problem. Now, once we do that, we unlock the opportunity for this next step. And the next step is to turn our organizations into leader development incubators. I stole this concept from a very famous CEO who's famous for saying, "We don't sell blank, we develop leaders." We are a leader development organization that just so happens to sell blank. I'll let you go ahead and put in the comments what you think it is that company sells. But while you do that, I want to read off some statistics on specifically leader development in our workforce today. According to Korn Ferry, only 27% of new leaders have access to leader development programs. Of those 27% organizations, only 17% of them even believe that their training is effective. So 17% of 27 is a pretty low number for effective leader development. 59% of managers receive no managerial training at all, according to Forbes. While 83% of organizations believe it's important to develop leaders, only 5% actually take action in doing so. And then lastly, more than 2/3 of bosses are actually accidental managers. And what does it mean by an accidental manager? It means they never intended to go into management. That's the sales rep that Maura was talking about that took the promotion to become a sales leader because added benefits and added responsibilities. It's the technician that becomes a first-line supervisor. It's the career engineer that takes the engineering management position. It's these individuals that have spent years and years being individual contributors, just like we all are as we progress through our schooling. And then they have to take a hard shift in their career and learn how to manage and lead people. So the challenge is, how do we do this? How do we tackle this challenge of all these individuals in our workforce today that are paralyzed in a fog and don't know what direction, what path to take to develop into healthy and effective leaders that can impact their organization? Well, what if we just copied the framework that an incredibly successful industry at training and developing its employees does? See, the aviation industry, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of flights going on each and every day. Yet how often do we hear of a mishap or incident that results from pilot error? Less than 0.1% of the flights that take place across our world today have any sort of incident tied to pilot error. If you think about that, that is fractional. So why don't we just copy them? They've got something figured out, don't they? So here's what the 3 critical components of a pilot's career are that the aviation industry uses in order to create these successful pilots throughout their career. Number 1, every pilot goes through flight school. That's where we learn the basics. We learn the skills of aviate, communicate, navigate, and contingencies. That's flight school in a nutshell. It provides us a baseline, a foundation that we will build upon for the rest of our careers. I think about my time in flight school. I started in this bare bones helicopter. We learned just basic maneuvers and then progressed into more challenging maneuvers, flying through the clouds. And ultimately, we learned some of the more tactical skills. Before then, they took us and put us into more advanced aircraft. For me, it was the Apache, and then I had to relearn how to do all those skills again, and then learn some skills specific to the mission set of an Apache pilot. But flight school isn't where things stop. It's only where things just start getting going. See, you graduate flight school with your wings, but that's just the equivalent of a learner's permit in our, driving culture today. It's just enough to get you going, but certainly not enough, and never will ever be enough to keep you going for the rest of your career. There has to be more. The second step is this concept of a pre-flight. I was getting ready for this. I was digging through some stuff, and I actually found my old pre-flight checklist from flight school. A little bit of nostalgia there, but a pre-flight you might think is just a pilot quickly walking around an aircraft before they go fly, but it's so much more than that. Pre-flight happens once a pilot gets given a mission, and then he has to start figuring out, well, how am I going to get there? What does the timing look like? How do I need to coordinate my crew and the maintenance personnel in order to ensure everybody knows exactly what they have to do and when they have to do it so we can succeed at this mission? A pre-flight, and one of the coolest things about it that the aviation industry uses, is this complex, consistent checklist that we use every single day before every single flight. The reason that the aviation industry mandates by regulation the use of checklists is because if you miss something, the consequences can be critical. So a pre-flight is exactly what pilots do in order to prepare themselves and their crews for success. It's doing everything that is within their control to enable the success of their mission. And then the last thing is the progression. Once a pilot graduates flight school, they enter into this community of other pilots. And that community is all focused on everybody's continuous progression. So you graduate flight school with the equivalent of a learner's permit, but the next step is to go out into the force and continue to grow and develop so you can earn the equivalent of your license. And you only do that by having people to the left and to the right of you, people ahead of you, and eventually people behind you that help you continue to become better and better over time. There's a clear path for everybody to take in their aviation career. Once you earn the equivalent of your license, you have the opportunity to continue to grow and become an instructor pilot, or become a maintenance pilot, or become a tactics pilot, or what have you, pursue some sort of leadership. It's this progression community that actually helps the knowledge from flight school be infused into the bloodstream of pilots. Because change happens in the context of relationship and community. And so if a pilot just goes through flight school and that's it, that's the peak of their career. But if a pilot enters into a community of people continuing to progress, they will only get better and better and better. And that's exactly what we want our pilots to be. So how do we apply this to developing leaders in our organizations today? Well, I think the first thing is that we create some sort of basic training where we can teach them exactly what's important for them to know and do as a leader. For me, I think that one is important to learn some self-leadership, but more importantly is what are the specific things you need to do in this role in order to be successful? What are the mindsets you have to learn to go from individual contributor to leader? What can you do with the resources that you have in order to support these individuals to be successful? It doesn't have to be crazy. It could be an hour a week. It can be, a couple days right up front when that individual gets promoted or accepted into that role. But what can we do to help set these leaders up for success, to lay a foundation for them so that they aren't starting from nowhere, but they have something to build upon? Flight school is all about learning the basics. You can't teach them everything, but you can teach them enough to inspire them to continue to grow and grow and grow. And that's why flight school is so important. The second thing is the concept of pre-flight. And pre-flight in the context of our organizations as leaders today is all about mastering the daily and weekly and even monthly routines that will enable our teams to be successful. In aviation, that's mission planning, it's crew responsibilities, it's aircraft checks, it's emergency actions, and it's fighter management. Now, I could probably spend about 30 more minutes going into the details of that, but instead we've got the leader's pre-flight checklist that if you follow the QR code on the screen, you can go ahead and download that. We'll get it sent right to you. And you can look through this checklist and share it with all the leaders on your team to really figure out and think about what are the things we can do on a routine basis. What are the things we can master on a routine basis that are going to help enable us to be successful, just like how pilots leverage pre-flights each and every day. You can follow the QR code here, or you can just go to operationlead.com and you'll see a button where you can download the checklist there as well. The last thing, and I think this is the most important thing that we can do, is create some sort of progression environment for our leaders. One of the things that I think is one of the The saddest things, arguably, that we see across the workforce today is this kind of idea or concept of being afraid to help people grow throughout their careers, because that might mean they have to promote out of our organizations. We should always want people to continue to grow, become better, have a bigger impact, regardless of where that is. That's our role and our responsibility as leaders. So I understand that not every company is going to be large enough to have its own progression environment like the Army might have for all of its aviators. But what resources can we use? What relationships can we develop in our industries, with partners, with people we might know, so that we can help develop a community that all of our leaders can go into, that promotes the progression of their development as leaders every single day? How do we help our next generation leaders go from having those driver's permits to having those licenses to continue to grow throughout their leadership careers? Here's one of the things that I think all of us have learned, and probably learned the hard way, but leadership is lonely. And the more lonely you are as a leader, the harder it is emotionally, mentally, to stand firm with the things you know you need to do as a leader. But when you feel like you're an island, it's hard. But if you have someone to the left of you and someone to the right of you that are on the same journey, if you have someone ahead of you that's mentoring you and providing some insight, and you have a clear path of where your career might be able to go if you continue to grow, you can consistently and will consistently be inspired to do those hard things that truly makes the difference as a leader. So far we've talked about treating leadership like a profession. We've talked about turning our organizations into leader development incubators. And these really address the main challenges that we see in our workforce and in our culture today. If treating leadership like a profession is like creating the fertile soil in our garden, turning our organization into a leader development incubator allows us to plant a seed every single time we put a leader into that program. But as we all know, you can't just create fertile soil and plant a seed. You have to nurture that seed. You have to water it. You have to help it grow. You have to prune it as it continues to develop over time. And that's why we have to really embrace this mindset, senior leaders across the workforce today, of empowering our leaders to transform the organization from the very bottom up. One of the cool things or interesting things about aviation is you can talk about all the skills as much as you want, but you will never be able to fully understand the skill set until you get in the aircraft and you figure it out in the sky. It's kind of like riding a bike. It's all fun and games with the training wheels on, but once you take them off, it's a totally different world. You got to figure it out. You got to be in the arena. That's what we have to do as leaders. We have to empower this next generation, these first-time leaders, to go out and fully embrace not just the management side of their roles, which is what most of us constantly demand, but the leadership side as well. We manage our roles and we lead our team. If we want our leaders to take their teams somewhere and ultimately take our whole organization somewhere, we have to empower them to do it. For anybody that heard the story about turning our organization into leader development incubators before, the answer was chicken. That comes from Chick-fil-A. And one of the cool things about Chick-fil-A is they call their headquarters a support center. Now, they don't just do that to be cool or fun. They call it a support center because it's the mindset they have about leadership. From the top down at Chick-fil-A, everybody exists to empower the restaurants across the country to be successful. This is a concept that Frank Blake, when he was the CEO of Home Depot, made really popular, called the inverted organizational hierarchy. If you think about it, we usually think of organizations like a triangle with the CEO at the top all the way down to the first line supervisors and the individuals executing on the ground floor. But what if we flip that? What if the CEO existed at the bottom to empower the vice presidents in the organization, and the vice presidents empowered their directors, and the directors empowered all the mid-level managers, and that just continued to flow all the way down through the first line leaders to those executing our mission? That's how we make lasting change. That's how we transform the cultures in our workforces, in our society, to do inspiring work that makes a difference. If you think about that, that's what a composer does. He's organizing all these different sounds into a beautiful symphony by empowering each of the musicians to do exactly what only they can do. That's our primary role as leaders. We develop great leaders that can go on and transform our organization and help us create the impact that we know we can have. I want to close out today by just bringing the story I opened up with full circle. And after about a year in command of Alpha Company, we had a really successful deployment. Thank God for no injuries, brought every single person home. And then about 3 months after we got home, I hit about a month in command, and we were required to take that same survey again. And I was absolutely blown away by the results. We ended up going from an organization characterized by 90% toxicity to an organization that had the highest marks my battalion commander had ever seen for transformational leadership, teamwork and collaboration, and effective communication. How do you go from 90% toxicity to those characteristics in 12 months? Well, I'll tell you one thing, it doesn't happen overnight. And the second thing is nothing that I had been taught in the military as a leader helped me make any of the difference. See, when I reflect on the things that actually moved the needle in my development as a leader, it's exactly what made a difference for me as a pilot. I met someone once right after I was really humbled as a leader, and they told me to read a book. A lot of you may be familiar with it. It was Mindset by Carol Dweck, and it totally opened my eyes. That book ripped the blinders off me and exposed me to a world of information that started changing me from the inside. And as I continued to consume all of that material, I learned how to master some of the critical things as a leader that nobody was telling me to do. And when we were able to create an environment in our organization where everybody was acting like that, it was fun. Work was a joy. So I want you to imagine what the possibilities could be. Think about the impact that your organization can have when leaders from the very bottom of your organization all the way through the top are thriving. The leadership is so far beyond just what takes place in our companies. Think about the impact that could have to individuals as husbands and wives, as moms and dads. Think about the impact that would have in our communities. Imagine people being proud to be affiliated with your organization because of the positive impact the leadership had on them. How would that change your culture? How would that change the way you view talent retention or recruiting? how would that change the way you sell the product that you sell? Great leaders develop great leaders. When first things are first, everything else falls into place. And when we take care of our people take care of us. You can go ahead and use the QR code there to connect with me on LinkedIn. I share tips and statistics on leader development quite frequently, and it would be great to connect with any of you. Or you can check us out at operationlead.com. You could also go there to download the leader's pre-flight checklist. And I just want to close out by saying thank you to Sales Xceleration for sponsoring this event. And one of the cool things is sales is just a specific application of leadership. And I can't think of an organization that has better perfected how to apply leadership in the sales industry than Sales Xceleration. So go ahead, take a look at this QR code if you want to make a lasting change in your sales department. I encourage you to book a call with Sales Xceleration so they can share how they can accelerate your sales growth today. Thanks, everybody.